Hey, welcome Stephen King fans. I'm Vince. I'm a Disciples of Christ minister and a longtime Stephen King fan. I've long thought that Stephen King's books were full of theology, and in many ways his books have shaped what I believe and I preach today. So I'm going through them one by one and looking at theological themes as well as looking at what I feel is the gospel message in each one. I'm probably not going to make it through all of them, but I'm on book 2. We'll see. If you'd like to find my video on King's first book, Carrie, and I also have the Theology of the Gospel according to Carrie on the page 2. You're welcome to look there for that. I also have my review of Salem's Lot on my page, and you're welcome to look for that. All right, but for this video, let's go ahead and look at the Gospel according to Stephen King as seen in Salem's Lot. There's going to be 3 parts to this video. First, for those of you who don't remember it, I'm going to give a brief summary, probably very, very brief summary of the book. Second, I'll look at 3 theological themes that I got when I read the book. And third, I'm going to explore what I feel is the gospel message in Salem's Lot. All right, part 1, for those of you who haven't read it in a while and need a recap. In Salem's Lot, Ben Mears is a novelist. He returns to his childhood hometown of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine, and he's intending to write a book about the Marston house. This is a mansion that traumatized him as a child. It's this huge mansion that sits up on a hill and overlooks the whole town. Shortly after his arrival, he begins a relationship with a girl named Susan Norton, and he also reconnects with some other people in town and meets some other people. One of these is an English teacher. His name is Matt Burke, and there's a doctor named Jimmy Cody. They're eventually going to kind of make a cadre of people that will figure out what's going on in the town. So at the same time that Ben shows up, there's these other strange men that show up, Kurt Barlow and his partner Richard Straker. And they move into this mysterious Marston house, and they also set up a shop where they're going to sell antiques. Soon, strange occurrences begin happening, like a dog is found gruesomely killed, a child named Ralphie Glick goes missing, and his brother Danny dies of unexplained causes. So this group, Matt, Ben, Susan, and Jimmy, they investigate with the help of the local priest, Father Donald Callahan. And they end up discovering that Barlow is a vampire, and he is slowly converting the town. There's also this young man that enters into the group, Mark Petrie. He discovers all about the vampires when Danny Glick, who has become a vampire, visits his house. There's this famous window scene, if you've ever seen the movie, where Danny Glick is floating and comes to his window, and Mark gets rid of him by showing him a cross. Anyway, the group goes after Barlow a number of times, so one time Susan gets converted, and it ends up where Ben has to kill her. One time Mark kills Straker. One time they go and Jimmy ends up dying, and a different thing happens all on its own where Matt, the English teacher, dies from just natural causes. So anyway, it leaves these two, Ben and Mark, the kid, and so Ben and Mark have to go and they kill Barlow, and then they leave the town for about a year, and then they end up having to go back to the town to finish up and kill all the vampires there. For religion or theology and the story, I want to first look at myth and science. So I'm going to call this myth and story versus science and logic. And so what King has set up for us here, first off, he got the idea when he was, for this book, when he was teaching Dracula. And he was really curious what would happen if Dracula showed up today. And the reason why is because he said, well, in Dracula, you have this old versus new, this old ancient ways of Dracula versus this new technology, and the new ends up winning. But if Dracula showed up today, you would end up having this new versus old. So you'd have Dracula with this ancient wisdom and everything, and the new wouldn't really know how to attack that. And so in a way, it really sets up this dichotomy between science and religion, like this ancient religious thought and science. And I thought that was really interesting, something to explore, because in our modern age, we often think of science as this thing that is way above, and everything has to cater to science. In fact, in this book that I reviewed on this channel called Human Communication as Narration by a man named Walter Fisher, Fisher argues that it used to be that all of our ways of expressing ourselves and all of our ways of dialogue were kind of on equal ground. But in the 19th century, it came to where scientific speech was elevated and everything else served it. And so we had to be able to explain and do everything scientifically. But what Fisher tried to show is that that's not actually how human nature works. We don't make our decisions and operate on the best spreadsheet. We make our decisions and shape our personal story by myth and the stories that we read. And so therefore, the way to fight myth is with myth. And this has been explored a lot by people like Michael Meade and Joseph Campbell. They look at myths and they try to find the universal truths that are expressed in those myths. And so we get that throughout this whole novel, right? I think the most blatant point is when Danny Glick comes to the window of Mark Petrie, and over again in that episode, we read that adults wouldn't have known how to deal with this situation because they were in an adult state. But Mark knew exactly what he was doing. So if Danny would have showed up to an adult would have gotten killed. But Mark, because he had studied monsters and he had studied the vampire lore, he knew how to deal with that. And King does that a lot in his novels. I mean, It is a big example where, as kids, we seem to know some kind of mystical truth that we don't know anymore once we're adults. What I saw there, what I'm reading through that is that when modern science comes around, we tend to negate evil almost. We don't even know how to deal with evil because we have to be able to express it in modern terms. For instance, if someone said, well, there is an actual vampire that lives in that house, or there are vampires today, we would think they were crazy. But when we look at the myth behind that, the metaphor behind that, we realize there is truth to that. There are powerful people who feed off of the energy and the labor and the lives of the vulnerable. But we can't do anything about it because we don't have the scientific language to talk about it. We have the myths to talk about it. There are people who enslave others with false promises and then drain them of everything, their life's blood, right? So anyway, what I'm getting at is that there are truths that we recognize that are better told through metaphor than they are through statistics. And that reminds me of a Bible verse, a very strange kind of Bible verse where, if you don't know, Jesus goes through his ministry and life, and then he dies, and then ostensibly he is resurrected. But he has this whole life there that we very seldom talk about. And in all those teachings, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he only teaches in stories. He teaches in parables. In fact, in Matthew 13:34, it says, Jesus told the crowds all these things in parables. Without a parable, he said nothing. In Mark, Jesus actually says, I will only speak in parables and metaphors to the crowds. And he says specifically, because I don't want them to understand. Well, that's weird. Why would Jesus only speak in metaphors, and why would he say he doesn't want people to understand? Well, I think the best interpretation of this is that Jesus knows that truth is not black and white, and it's best approached in story. What Jesus is saying, in my opinion, is truth is always, or not always, about certainty. It's about meaning. And the way that we encounter meaning is through myth, and it's through story. Okay, number 2, communal sin versus individual sin. So one of the things that I think you need to know, and I say this in my review in order to understand this book, is this book is about the town, right? That is the main character. I mean, Barlow comes to the town, but Barlow does not make the town bad. The town is a bad town. In fact, in later short stories, King will kind of introduce the town as being sort of evil enshrouded town. So Barlow ends up coming to that town. It's almost like it draws him in. And what we're getting this picture of this community that is already hollowed out by apathy and cruelty and neglect. This isn't just about individual sin, it's about communal sin, a shared moral decay that no one is willing to confront. So you see like Sandy McDougal learning how to become an abusive mother, which is kind of disturbing as you read it. Coley Sawyer, who suspects his wife of cheating and so plans this very violent confrontation with her. Charlie Rhodes, who drives a school bus, and he's always thinking about hurting these children. So anyway, what I'm getting at is it's about the community and these communal sins and how the institutions in the community aren't able to help the community. All right, so that idea of communal sin is deeply biblical. In the Old Testament, we see in the prophets like Amos and Isaiah and Jeremiah, they're always condemning Israel, not ever for individual sins that people do, but for these collective injustices. This is from Amos, chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. They sell the innocent for silver. They trample on the heads of the poor. In the New Testament, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, not because of individual sins again, but because that's the city that kills the prophets and refuses peace. There's also this episode that you may know about. It's a very popular episode where Jesus walks into the temple and he sees the money changers there, and he says, get out. He pushes them out and he says, you've made my house a den of thieves. You've made my Father's house a den of thieves. Well, what we get wrong is we often think Jesus is condemning that practice because he doesn't want them selling things in the temple. They're cheating people. Well, there's no historical evidence whatsoever that they were cheating people, or that Jesus even disliked that practice of selling things in the temple. What those words mean when Jesus says, "You've made my Father's house a den of thieves," he's actually quoting Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is very specifically talking to the community there. He's saying, you overlook the poor. You let people starve to death. You don't feed people. You don't give them shelter and clothing. Instead, you overlook all of that and you go to the temple and you hide away so that you feel like all the things you forgot to do out here, or the way that you forsook everybody else, God's going to forgive all that because you hide away like a den of thieves in the temple. So that's what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about communal sin and how we treat others and hide behind religion. And so, of course, we see that today with the same thing, right? Like entire communities look away from homelessness or hunger. We turn a blind eye to school shootings. We blame individuals, but we don't wonder why that happens so frequently or really only in our country. Churches stay silent in the face of racism or corruption, or, like many, many times in the past, they participate in it. It's a communal sin. And so what Salem's Lot is getting at here is that's how sin works. It's not just on an individual basis. It has to do with how we interact with one another. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting and introspective for us. The third thing that I saw, and this was probably the most obvious to me, has to do with the Lord's Supper. If you don't know what the Lord's Supper is, it's this time in the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus, right before he's betrayed and he's taken into custody, right before then, he sits down and he has this Passover meal with his followers, with his disciples. And at that meal at one point, Jesus takes bread. And the actual words that Jesus says kind of differ from gospel to gospel and also in Paul's letters when he talks about it. But essentially, they all say this. Jesus took this bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body. Do this in remembrance of me." And then he took a cup of wine and he said the same thing. "This is my blood shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Christians disagree on exactly what that means, like what happens when you take the Lord's Supper. Is there anything that really happens? What does it mean? But Catholics, and that's who we're dealing with here, because we're dealing with Father Callahan. Catholics believe very specifically it is not a symbol. like this bread and wine actually turn into the blood and body of Christ. But even the Catholic Church, there are different interpretations of what that is actually supposed to mean when you take it into your body. But it is definitely the body and blood. One of the best interpretations I've heard was expressed by Catholic priest Richard Rohr, who's also a Christian author. And he said, by putting the body and blood of Jesus into our own bodies in a way that's almost sexual, we become one, so that we are becoming Jesus and being sent out as Jesus to the world. Well, look what happens in the book. There's this part in the book where Father Callahan faces off against Barlow. So Barlow comes into Mark's house, kills Mark's parents. He's got Mark. He's about to slit Mark's throat. And Callahan stands up and shows him the cross, and the cross starts glowing. And Barlow says, look, I'll let the boy go, but you have to put your cross down. And so Callahan says, no, you're not really going to let the boy go. And so Barlow does. Well, the boy's gone now, and Callahan is too scared to give up his cross. And so eventually his cross stops glowing, and Barlow's able to go over there and just take the cross out of his hand. And he says, you've lost your faith. So what he does is he cuts his throat, and he has Callahan drink from it. So Callahan is forced to drink the blood of Barlow. And then Barlow sends him out into the world, and now he's not a disciple, but he's a marked person. So he's kind of like this in-between spiritual stage where he can't go into any churches, but he belongs to Barlow, and so no other vampires will harm him. So think about that. It is this man who every week takes the body and blood of Christ into his own body, now takes the body and blood of Barlow into his body and becomes more and more like Barlow. To me, the interesting thing about these books, obviously, is you can draw your own conclusion about what that means. I will say, to me, the message of that is that regardless of if you want to or not, you are putting something else into your body and becoming more and more like that. Whether that brings good into your life and it marks you as a loving force, or whether it brings evil into your life and marks you as an evil force, we are partaking of either the Lord's Supper or Satan's Supper or something like that, like a supper of good or a supper of evil all the time. Anyway, that's what I got out of it. Okay, part 3, the Gospel according to Stephen King. The gospel, the word gospel in Greek means good news, and it is good news of redemption and new life. So I kind of asked myself, well, how is redemption taught in this book? What is the new life in this book? And there's really an interesting theological thread that runs through Salem's Lot, and it's voiced by Father Callahan when we first see him. And he's talking about that he separates this big E evil from this small e evil. He romanticizes the idea of a great battle against darkness, but he ignores the small ways that evil works in everyday life, like through neglect and fear and self-righteousness and institutional decay, which he talks about all the time with the Catholic Church. And in doing so, he becomes a hollow vessel. He stops really caring for people. He gets tired of hearing confessions or helping those in his congregation that he can help. You can't fight cosmic evil if you've grown numb to everyday evil. You can't wield sacred symbols, as he finds out, if you have forgotten the love, humility, and faith that once gave them power. And to me, it's a lot like people who say, I'd give my life for my country. And that sounds really noble, but what about just being kind to people in your country? What about showing patience to your neighbor or compassion to someone who's struggling? Or to say, I die for my family. I love my wife and kids. I die for them. That's great, but could you unload the dishwasher? Would you take Sarah to school this morning? I'm running a bit late. So we glorify these big dramatic gestures of sacrifice, but often we can't be bothered with the small acts of love and responsibility that actually hold the whole relationship together. Just like Callahan, we want to face evil, big E, with a sword and a prayer, but we don't want to do the daily work of fighting evil with empathy and humility and presence. As a pastor, I hear this all the time. Jesus died for me. I get very sick and tired of hearing that. Jesus died for me, and that's the gospel. Okay, I mean, that's good and all, but Jesus lived for you too. It's much easier to die for our beliefs than to live a life of love and acceptance. But redemption and salvation is not found in grand gestures and what you would give your life for, but it's found in the mundane and what you would live your life for. And that, to me, is the gospel according to Stephen King as found in Salem's Lot. All right, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, I hope you subscribe, and have a good one.